Hello and welcome to my studio. I'm Lars. I'm an upcycle designer. Today I'm going to demonstrate my 3 go-to methods for making straps, ties, trim. The linguistic marketplace is pretty open on this one. I think anything more elegant than saying fabric tube works. So I'm just going to say strap. Knowing how to make straps is so useful if you want to design and make your own clothes, or if you want to upcycle, mend, or upsize a thrifted garment. The 3 versions I'll be showing you today are wide, spaghetti, and double fold. And I'm instantly regretting not giving them all pasta names, but that's another linguistic tangent you probably don't want me to go down, so let's get started. Whatever width you want in your final design, just double that number and add ½ inch for the seam allowance. You can see my pattern piece here where I cut out the entire piece for one strap that I'll need, but you can also make a version of a pattern where it's folded in half, and that way you can just cut it on the fabric fold. You can, of course, make it as thick or long as your project and aesthetics demand, but for a size small camisole, like I'm doing here, my pattern piece is 17 inches long and 5.5 inches wide for a 2.5 inch wide strap with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. For the wide method, I cut either parallel or perpendicular to the selvage edge, but also feel free to cut along the bias diagonally across the fabric. But cutting straight across the grain is easier when you don't have a lot of fabric to work with. Once your 2 straps are cut, fold them each lengthwise, aligning the edges, and pin them along that edge with the pretty side of the fabric facing inward. Sew a straight stitch along that newly pinned edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Use a bodkin, safety pin, tweezers, or loop turner to flip both straps inside out so the pretty side is now facing outward. For a short strap like this, I attach my bodkin to a cord, dangle it into the strap, pinch the other end, and feed the bodkin through the strap with my fingers, scooching the fabric as I go until it's all flipped inside out. Iron the straps flat. I like to center the seam, but you can scooch it closer to the edge if you'd prefer. Now these straps are ready to be sewn to my camisole. Here is the wide strap sewn onto a camisole. You can also modify this version and make a strap for a tote bag. You could make a scrunchie, or really modify it and make these sort of lattice tabs and upsize the side of a tank with it. Here is a slightly thinner version of the wide strap. I wouldn't go too much thinner than this because since we're cutting it on the grain instead of diagonally, it doesn't have as much give. And so if you go too thin with it, it will end up getting a little too puckery and wavy. But next I'm going to show you the spaghetti strap method. It's cut on the bias, and that solves this little problem. For a spaghetti strap, I highly recommend cutting on the bias, which means cutting at a 45-degree angle diagonally across the fabric. This creates a little bit of a secret stretch and makes a much smoother strap than if you cut straight along the grain line of woven fabric. Use a yardstick as a guide. I like to use a rotary cutter. Tailor's chalk can also be very useful. I want a strap that's right between a 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch in width, with a seam allowance just shy of a 1/4 inch. So I'm cutting 1 inch wide strips. For a longer strap, like a lace-up closure that's yards long, you'll want to attach all the strips first. For a smoother look, I cut the ends at 45-degree angles. You now have one long strip. It's tricky to flip a thin woven strap, so before I fold it lengthwise with the pretty side facing inward, I sew a thin strand of cord or yarn at one end. Then with the needle down into the fabric, I pivot, and as I'm sewing down the entire length of the strap, I make sure the cord is loose inside the strap and that I don't accidentally sew over it. When I get to those little seams that connected the strips, I like to sew past them, reverse, and sew over them again to strengthen them. For extra long straps like this, once I sew a foot or two, I already start flipping it inside out. With the needle down into the fabric, I start pulling the cord that's inside. I sort of turtleneck the end and finagle it with my fingers or tweezers, and then pull the cord sort of inside of itself till it's about 2 inches from the presser foot. As I sew a few feet at a time, I'll lower the needle, pull a bit more through. This is so much easier than trying to pull multiple yards through when you're at the end. For shorter straps, though, you can just pull it through at the end if you'd prefer. Once you've sewn to the end, carefully pull the remaining strap through until it's completely inside out. If your strap is 4 or 5 yards long, this process can take like 20 minutes, conveniently the length of a sitcom. So I suggest mindlessly doing this while you also watch your favorite episode of Frasier. It might feel like you're playing cat's cradle with yourself for a while, but once the end of your strap is fed through, you can cut the cord and continue flipping the entire strap inside out while Frasier and Niles sip some sherry. Here's an example of basic spaghetti strap on a camisole, a version of spaghetti straps that tie at the shoulders. Extra long spaghetti strap, threaded through several times and lace up the back. Here is an example of spaghetti strap 3 ways as the halter and back ties on this shoulder pad bralette, as soutache hand sewn onto the cups, and I put a wire inside of it and shaped it to make this little vintage wire detail. I love a gorgeously impractical upcycle. I used spaghetti strap for this and threaded wire through it and shaped it into a spiral bralette. I guess I don't know if it's really a bra, a decorative harness. If fabric is limited and you don't want to mess with flipping a strap inside out, I would suggest the double fold method. Here I'm using the sleeve of a button up for fabric. The length and width of the straps you'll need to cut out will depend on your project. If I'm making ties for a camisole that ties in the back or on the side, I usually go for 20 inches long. For the width, decide how wide you want the final strap to be and multiply the number by 4. If I want a 3/8 wide strap, I would cut a 1.5 wide strip. Cutting diagonally across your fabric may lead to a smoother strap, especially when you use this method to make double fold bias tape, but if you want to save fabric, cut parallel to the selvage edge or even perpendicular in a pinch. With a hot iron and the underside of the fabric facing up, fold both edges lengthwise inward. Now the strap is half as wide, then fold the entire thing lengthwise and iron it flat. It should now be your desired width. You can also use a bias tape maker to streamline the process. You can iron the ends inward while you iron everything else, or you can fold them right before you sew, or leave them raw and tie little knots at the ends. Now just sew very close along that open edge and you have got a double fold strap, which tend to be a little bit wavy even after ironing them again, so they usually work best as less visible ties. Well, those are my 3 go-to methods for sewing straps. Modify them to your heart's content. I am positive that in future tutorials, I will be referencing these methods, so you can always circle back to this video if you need a little refresher. I think that's one for the books. I go on, you good thing.